Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today I will be discussing the subject of Hokum Sharai, law or value of Sharia. Law or value, because this subject is concerned with the 5 values, the Ahkam Khamsa, Wajib, Mandub, Mubah, Makruh, Haram. When you mention Hokum Sharai, these are at the forefront of your discussion. If you Mandub, for example, it is not a law, but it is a value point. That is why I translate Hukum Sharai as law in value of Sharia. It is also a subject that is close to our discussion on commands and prohibition. Hukum is literally, it means to prove or to disprove something with reference to something else. When we say that A owns this house, then we have issued a hukum, affirmatively approving A's ownership of that property. Or it may negate something with reference to something else. If we say that A does not own that house, again we have issued a hukum, but this time we have negated something in that respect. Hukum may be rational, aqli, it may be something hissi, that is palpable to the senses, or it may be Sharai. When you say 1 plus 3 equals 4, this is a rational hukum. When you say that sugar is sweet, this is hissi, that is palpable to the senses. But when you say that it is an obligation to pay the zakat, then that is a Sharai hukum. In each case we establish some kind of state with reference to a value point or a ruling. It is the details of this Hukum Sharai. There is quite a long chapter, about 40 pages in my book. I will not be, for fear of making the whole discussion too technical, I will keep to the less technical part, but I will touch on other themes, but the students or those interested can read the detail in the book. Hukum has 2 main parts. One is the ruling or the hukum itself, the text or the law that we are looking at. And the second is the proper implementation of that hukum. The first one is called Hukum Taklifi, that is defining law that imposes a command or a prohibition or any of those 5 values. But then the second variety of hukum is called Hukum Wad'i, or declaratory law, which expounds the proper manner of implementing that hukum. A hukum must have a proper grounds, it has a cause, and there are some conditions for its implementation, and there are times when a hukum may not be implemented. So this is the subject of sabab, shart, and mani, cause, condition, and obstacle. And this is the subject of declaratory law or hukum taklifi. The hukum is given the definition that it is a communication from the lawgiver concerning the conduct of the mukallaf, a competent person, which consists of either a demand or an option or an enactment. Hukum, which consists of a demand, may be a command or a prohibition. Hukum that consists of an option is Mubah. Mubah gives the person an option to do or not to do. Or it may consist of a range of things that the person can choose one of several options. Like when someone pays an expiation or a kafara, it may be releasing a slave, fasting, or feeding poor people. There is an option. Or it may consist of an enactment. Enactment is an objective statement of the law. For example, there is a hadith that the killer does not inherit. It is an enactment that may apply or may not apply, but it is a hukum that states that when this happens, the inheritance is blocked. When the hukum is conveyed in binding terms, it consists of either haram or wajib. For example, the wajib in the Quran, Muslims are addressed to fulfill their contracts. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu awfu bil uqud. This is a hukum, consists of a command, and it conveys a wajib. Or it may convey a haram. La taqtulu an-nafs allati. Do not slay an innocent life. This conveys of a haram or a prohibition. But if the demand in a hukum is conveyed in non-binding terms, then it would establish something like mandub, like something recommendable. Recommendable is not enforceable in legal terms, but it is a hukum as it is established a value. We have given example in the Quran when someone gives a loan to someone else, it is recommended that it should be reduced into writing, and this is mandub. A hukum that is consists of something mubah or an option. In the Quran we read, when you have come out of the ihram in the hajj, fastwadu, you may hunt, you may go hunting. This is a hukum, but it consists of an option. Then the hukum occurs, as I mentioned, in two varieties. One is the hukum taklifi. That is the first part of our discussion. This is divine law that imposes an obligation or imposes a command or a prohibition. Hukum taklifi is defined as a communication from the lawgiver addressed to a competent person or a mukallaf, which consists of either a demand or an option. And this hukum taklifi occurs in 5 varieties: wajib, mandub, mubah, makruh, haram. Obligatory, recommendable, permissible, reprehensible, and forbidden. The hukum taklifi occurs in 5 varieties. We discussed the first one of these, which is wajib. Wajib consists of an obligation, and it is defined as a communication from the lawgiver addressed to a competent person, which conveys a demand, a binding demand to do something. To conform with a wajib leads to a reward, and violating a wajib causes a sanction or punishment. If the wajib, the text that imposes a wajib, is definitive in both its meaning and authenticity, like a clear text of the Quran, then according to the majority of ulama, it is wajib, which is definitive. The Hanafis call this as fard, 1 degree above. And they distinguish this kind of fard from one that consists of some kind of doubt, either in the meaning of the text or in the authenticity of its reception. For example, if a command or a wajib is conveyed in an ahad hadith, the meaning may be clear, but since there is always a doubt in the narration of the solitary hadith, then this is reduced from the degree of fard to wajib according to the Hanafis. For example, the obligation to perform zakat, to give charity to the poor, that is a command. That is a command that is definitive, both its meaning in every respect. But to recite the surah Fatiha in Salat, this is wajib, this is not fard. The difference is, according to those who draw this distinction, the Hanafis, that denial of a fard leads to infidelity or denial of Islam itself. Whereas denial of something which is merely wajib, it incurs sin, a ma'asiyah, but does not take one out of the fold of Islam. This distinction between wajib and fard, the Jumhur, the majority, do not recognize this. In Al-Ghazali, who is a Shafi scholar, he says we know that the text that imposes a wajib is sometimes there is some level of doubt, but we still, wajib is a monolithic category, and we do not recognize a distinction between wajib and fard. Wajib is divided into several categories. First is a division between a personal obligation and a collective obligation. The personal obligation is wajib aini or fardu ain, which is everyone who bears it must perform it, and when you are indebted a certain amount of money, this is your obligation to pay it. Honoring your parents, that is your personal obligation. But collective obligation is not personal, in the sense that it is a duty of the community generally to perform it. But if some members perform it and others don't, then the whole is acquitted and absolved. For example, performing the burial prayer, Salat al-Janaza, or giving testimony in a particular case, or fulfilling the obligation of jihad. Some people will do it and others may not, but that is the nature of wajib kifai or fard kifai. Sometimes there are occasions when the one kifai is elevated to the level of aini. Collective obligation turns to a personal obligation if there is, for example, no one but one person in the community who can fulfill it. Like if there is only one mujtahid who can carry out ijtihad over a particularly stressing case, then this becomes his personal obligation. Or if there is one witness and no one else, that becomes his personal obligation. Then wajib is also divided into wajib muwaqqat and wajib mutlaq. Wajib mutlaq is an absolute wajib which is not specified with regard to the time of its performance. Like doing the Hajj, going to the pilgrimage of Hajj, any time during one's lifetime. Or for example, but Wajib Muwaqqat is that which is specified in respect of time. Performing the Salat or fasting during Ramadan is within certain time segments. That is why it is time-bound obligation. And the third qualification of wajib is muhaddad ghair muhaddad, that is limited and unlimited. The one that is limited in terms of quantity, some of the punishments that occur in the Quran, these are wajib muhaddad. The unlimited variety is, it is a wajib, but any amount is acceptable. Like charity above the level of the obligatory charity, or nafaqa, maintenance that is required of a husband. This is not quantified specifically in terms of quantities. There is some flexibility. The manner of fulfillment of a wajib, it is in three varieties. Either it is performed in the perfect manner, or that this is ada. Ada is distinguished from qadwa and from i'ada, fulfillment in the ideal manner, like doing the prayer in congregation. That is the perfect way of performing the salat. And qadwa is belated salat, belated prayer. If you fail to do it in time, belated prayer is called qada. Or i'ada, when you have prayed, for example, but you later think there was some imperfection in it, then you do it again. These are the three ways that wajib can be executed. The next heading of the 5 hukum taklifi is mandub, that is recommendable. It is defined as a demand of the lawgiver addressed to a competent person to do something that is not binding. To do something recommendable may earn one a reward, or it may not. There is a difference of opinion. And mandub is also known as sunnah. The majority of ulama, including the Shafi'is, have used 3 other terms. One is for mandub, one is sunnah. Sunnah refers to something that the Prophet has done, and then we follow that. Mustahab is another name. Mustahab, that which is loved, which is liked. This refers to something that the Prophet has done at times, but not always. And then tatawwu, something supererogatory, something, someone does something good without following a precedent or a sunnah. If you decide to write a book or an article to educate people, that is mandub, that is recommendable, but it is not specifically following a particular precedent. There are differences of variation. There are variations in the terminology that is used for the varieties, the sub-varieties of mandub among the various schools, the leading schools of Sharia. The Hanafis, for example, divide the sunnah, which is a variety of mandub, into mu'akkada, emphatic sunnah, that which the Prophet has regularly performed. For example, congregational prayer, or giving the azan before the prayer. This is regularly done. or that the Prophet has at times performed it, at times not. Like supererogatory prayer or nafil prayer, or giving charity above the limit of the required charity. This is sunnah ghair mu'akkada, unemphatic sunnah. And there is a third variety, sunnah al-zawa'id. That is, sometimes we notice that the Prophet has liked certain type of clothing, certain colors. It's not required we do it. But if we do it, this is called sunnah zawa'id. The Malikis have used different wordings. The Hanbalis also, like in Maliki, they call raga'ib, tatawwu, nawafil. Hanbalis, ta'a, qurba, ihsan. They are very, very close to one another. And the meaning is the same. Something recommendable, but there are maybe some shades of differences between these, but I have written about the distinction between these terminologies. Al-Shatibi has observed that Mandub is an aid to Wajib. It leads to something Wajib. It is something in for example, wearing clean clothes. It's something recommendable. It leads to Wajib because purity of body in attire. There is, of course, a certain requirement that is Wajib. And when you do more than that, or that which leads to it, that is in the nature of Mandub. The manner of the language, the linguistic terms in which the Mandub is conveyed in the Quran or Hadith. Sometimes the actual word is used. The Prophet says, if you perform wudu, ablution, on the day of, on Friday is good, but you take a bath, that's better. The better part is the recommendable part. The Shafis do not recognize situations when Mandub can turn into Wajib. But the Hanafis do recognize this. This is when you do, for example, nafil prayer, supererogatory prayer. Once you have done the niyyah and you have started it, although it is Mandub, after that it becomes Wajib. This is the Hanafi position. If you abandon it, then you must do a qadwa, belated performance. The Shafi says that there is no such requirement, and Mandub remains Mandub, it never becomes Wajib. My next discussion is Haram, also known as Mahzur in Arabic, that is prohibited. It is a binding demand of the lawgiver addressed to a competent person to abandon something. And the text, in the language in which it is found, it is definitive. According to the majority of schools, this is the definition of Wajib, but the Hanafis, once again, the definition of Haram. The Hanafis once again bring in this additional category of Makruh Tahrimi. I'll be discussing Makruh next, but Makruh Tahrimi is one that is close to Haram but does not quite reach that level, because there is some doubt in either the authenticity of the text or in its meaning. When that is the case, then the Haram in the full sense is reduced one by one level, and it becomes Makruh Tahrimi. The difference again is that a denial in principle of Haram leads to infidelity, but the denial of something Makruh Tahrimi is sinful but not take one out of the fold of Islam. There are different, of course, variation in the linguistic form. in which the haram occurs in the Quran, beginning with prohibition. La taqtulu, do not slay, do not kill. This typical form of conveying the haram. Sometimes the word haram is used. Hurrimat alaykum, this is haram upon you, consuming a dead carcass, for example. أحل الله البيع وحرم الربا, he has made riba haram. Sometimes and the text use the negation of halal. لا يحل مال امرئ مسلم, to devour the property of another person is haram, but the term it occurs that it is not lawful. Sometimes haram is conveyed by enacting a punishment for a certain conduct. That conveys haram, condemnation. In the Quran, we read those who devour the property of the orphans, like devouring fire into their bellies. This is strong condemnation. That becomes haram. Haram is divided into two types. One is haram li zatihi, haram for its own sake. The enormity of the conduct is self-evident, like killing, like adultery, like marrying your sister, something like. The consequence of this is that it cannot give rise to any claim or any right. Zina, adultery, does not give rise to legitimacy or legitimate offspring. Haram li ghayrihi, or haram for something else, because of something else. Like making an offer of betrothal to a married woman. Offering of betrothal or engagement is lawful, but because this person is married, it is haram for something else, because of something else. The distinction between the two is that neglecting the first one is not allowed except in situation of dire necessity, whereas haram he may be is allowed sometimes even if it avoids severe hardship. Like a physician is not allowed to look at the private parts of his patient, but for the sake of because it is necessary, this is permitted. And looking is not haram, but looking in the circumstances become haram. If haram in something good combine with one another, the haram dominates. If there is combination between haram in qurba, an act of devotion, like fasting on the day of Eid, it haram dominates. In the qurba, the good part in it is not counted. Now I'll be discussing makruh or reprehensible. This is also a demand from the lawgiver addressed to a competent person to avoid something, but not in binding terms, not in prohibited terms. There is no punishment for committing makruh or no reward for even omitting it. In many ways, makruh is the opposite of mandub, like wajib is the opposite of haram. We have, again, the Hanafis earlier I said, divide makruh into two types: makruh that is close to haram, then makruh that is for the sake of purity, makruh tahrimi, makruh tanzihi. Like there is sometimes in the text the word is used as haram, but it's reduced one level in the hadith. This is a solitary hadith referring to the gold in silk. هذان حرامان لرجال أمتي. These two are haram to wear for men, but okay for women. The Hanafi say because this is a solitary hadith, some doubt in its authenticity, it is not haram, it is makruh tahrimi, one level below. But if you go to Friday prayer or congregational prayer, you are advised not to take raw garlic. To take raw garlic at that time, it is makruh tanzihi, for the sake of purity, not causing offense. The Quran on occasions refer to this, and there is a verse, Surah 17, verse 38. All of this, كل ذلك كان سيئة عند ربك مكروها. All of them are an abomination in the eyes of your Lord. In the references, one who walks with arrogance, one who takes a position without knowing, without knowledge, one who does not give full measurements in weights, and one who breaks his promise. All of this is referred to in the text followed, saying that these are abominations in the eyes of Allah. Similarly, there are texts in hadith asking too many questions and giving something undesirable in charity. You're supposed to give something which is good, perfect. And there is a hadith like Kariha Nabiyu Salata Nisfun Nahar. Kariha is a derivation of Makruh. The Prophet disliked prayer at midday time. Wait until the sun declines. Makruh is the lowest degree of haram. Often when the scholars they consider something, they don't find sufficient evidence to declare it unlawful, they put it in this basket of makruh. So next discussion is mubah. Mubah, that is permissible, also called halal in jaiz in Arabic. Permissibility is also classified as a hukum because sometimes the Quran uses those terms. It is no sin for you to do this and that. It is a communication from the lawgiver addressed to a mukallaf, giving an option with regard to doing or not doing. This is the definition of mubah. Like in the text, we have permitted to you, al-yawma uhilla lakum. We have made halal to you to consume of pure food. And then the text use expression like la junah. There is no blame if you make an offer of betrothal to a woman, for example. And then there are committing an unlawful, something unlawful due to necessity in zarura. This is also mubah. It is the text in Surah 2, verse 173. Tell us, if you do it out of necessity, uttering a word of kufr, for example, under ikrah, under compulsion. Sometimes the text may be in the language of a command, but what it conveys is a permissibility. After the Friday prayer, scatter in the land. It's only permissible. And when there is no textual indication about something, then we refer to the principle of ibaha. As I earlier discussed, this is a presumption of ibaha. This is the basic norm. If there is no other indication, we put it under mubah. Mubah is in three varieties. One is that there is no harm in it, doing or not doing. like walking in fresh air, hunting, eating. The second varieties is that and there is no harm for the individual to do something mubah, but it is basically prohibited, like eating unlawful food due to necessity and starvation, or uttering a word of kufr due to compulsion. And the third variety is, well, for lack of better terms, we put it under mubah, but it is not quite accurate, like the acting of a child or of an animal, or even the act of God. What do we call it? Mubah, they say. You cannot put it under any other category. Or certain things that a person did before he became Muslim or before Islam. Our position, Al-Ghazali says, with regard to these examples is that we just abandon and we don't put any value on it. But these are the three varieties of Mubah. Again, there is another classification of Mubah that is, I would not discuss it. Some Mubah is okay for an individual, but it's not okay for the community as a whole. And in that order, for individual, for community, certain other varieties of Mubah have been discussed by the ulama of usul. There are times that an act may fall under any of these various categories. An example of this is marriage. Marriage is basically mubah for a person, but it is wajib if a person is in imminent fear of falling into sin, in zina. Then it's wajib for him if he has the means, if he is fit to marry. It becomes mandub for a person who is fit, who has the means, and that. But it becomes makruh for a person if he believes that he may commit violence. He is probably a violent character. And it becomes haram, marriage, if he is definite that this will lead to violence and to loss of life or limb. If someone has confirmed record of violent crimes, for example. My second discussion is the variety of hukum, that is a declaratory law. This is the variety of hukum that facilitates the implementation, the proper implementation of the first variety of defining law or hukum taklifi. In the discussion here refers to cause, the cause of a particular hukum. A hukum can exist only when its proper cause is in existence, and it collapses when it doesn't. There are certain conditions that must be fulfilled before a hukum can be implemented. Like in marriage, you have to have two witnesses, for example. It gives full effect to the implementation of that hukum. And there are times that a hukum cannot be implemented, like you are required to pay the obligatory charity, but that collapses if you are indebted to the level of insolvency. If all of your properties to be consumed, consumed in that debt, then there is no zakat to pay. That becomes a mani. Some hukum wad'i may sometimes be within the ability of the individual. At times it may not be, like the arrival of the time. is the cause of the prayer. Arrival of the time is not within the capacity of a person. The cause of a valid contract, a valid contract of sale, for example, is a proper offer in acceptance, in agreement. That is the cause of it. The condition of talaq, a divorce, is that there should be a marriage in existence before a divorce can take place. And also that there are requirements, detailed requirements in the nature of cause, condition, obstacle, that need to be looked at carefully in order to implement the ahkam of Sharia in the way properly, and we recognize the shades of implementation by looking at the details of the Hokum Wad'i. There are two other discussions that have been placed under this title of Declaratory Law or Hokum Wad'i. This is the discussion of Sahih in Batil. And according to the Hanafis, the three classifications of Sahih: valid, Batil, invalid, and Fasid, that which is voidable. This is placed under the discussion of Hukum Wad'i because a hukum, a ruling of law, or the conduct of a person becomes valid, sahih, when all the conditions, the cause, and the requirements are fulfilled. Then it becomes sahih. And a contract is valid, is sahih, a contract of marriage, for it to generate all its legal effects. This classification of valid and invalid, according to the majority of schools, monolithic categories, we do not recognize shades of degrees of invalid. Invalid is invalid. And that is the same according to all schools with regard to devotional matters, ibadat. They are either valid or invalid. But in regards to mu'amalat and civil transactions, the Hanafis introduced this intermediate category of fasid, irregular or void. Partly because these are, if the imperfection of something, of a hukum, is attached to one of its conditions, we cannot fulfill a condition. Marriage, there has to be two witnesses. But the rukun of marriage, the essentials of marriage, a valid agreement is in place. It's only the condition that is not fulfilled. This is fasid, because the Hanafi says that we can bring witnesses even later to testify. It can be completed. But if the imperfection or the deficiency attaches to the essential pillar or requirement, then that when that is that becomes batil. If there is no offer in acceptance in a marriage, that is batil, it is invalid, null and void. There is another classification of azima and rukhsa. Azima is the original law. Rukhsa is the concessionary hukum or law. This is sometimes we don't know exactly whether it is accurate to place it under declaratory law, and scholars are not unanimous, but azima refers to a normal command or law in its unmitigated form. If you say that it is your obligation, perform the prayer, the salat, without any addition. This is the azima, the original law in its original form. But then when you add the concessions to salat, for example, to prayer, a person who is ill may do it in this form or this, and all the even contracts in devotional matters, there are situations when a certain concessionary law is attached to the original hukum, to the original law, that is azima. But when there are concessionary situations, if you are traveling, for example, you are allowed to shorten your prayer. But when it comes to an end, your travel, the original law returns back into its place. Then you are not allowed to shorten your prayer. The same, if you are traveling, you are not expected to fast. But when you come home, then you resume. The original law comes into play. The distinction, the rukhsa, the concessionary ahkam or rules of Sharia are due either to necessity, sometimes in order to prevent starvation and death, you are allowed to consume unlawful food. This is a rukhsa. Or sometimes it may be due in order to prevent hardship only, like opening a fast during the time of travel. This is in order to avoid hardship. There are times, on occasions, the Sharia has allowed certain things, although there are some irregularity in it, some varieties of contract. There are some abnormalities, but like the contract of ijara in salam, lease in hire and forward sale, something is missing. But because there is a benefit in it, there is a concession is made for that reason. I have discussed the two main varieties of hukum, but the concession or the discussion, the fuller discussion of hukum sharai also requires attention to three other topics, and I will not be discussing them in detail, but I have written about them. That is, first is the hukum sharai is the law itself, and we have discussed that in detail. But the hakim, the lawgiver, that is one who issues the hukum. A hukum must originate in a proper authority, and then there are discussions that we attach values to conduct because the lawgiver has dictated so. The good and the evil, the discussion, the attachment of values to human conduct, is it inherent in the nature of things, the good and evil, or is it only because the lawgiver has said so? This is a discussion that falls under hakim. Also, the lawgiver must communicate the law to the mukallaf, to the competent person, so that the competent person is aware of in the expectation that he must comply. And finally, that the law that is communicated must be, the person must be able to understand it. It must be something that is not a total mystery, but can be understood. Then the next limb, one of the two, is the hukum shari, the hakim, the lawgiver, then mahkum fihi, the subject matter of the hukum. The subject matter of the hukum is the action of the conduct of the competent person or the mukallaf. Uh, the person is expected either to fulfill something, an obligation, wajib, or to avoid something, which is in the nature of haram. And that is the subject matter of either a command or a prohibition. And what is the nature of that demand? And that is the subject matter of hukum, that it is known to the person to whom it is addressed, and whether it is the subject matter is something the person is capable of compliance, whether it consists of the right of God or the right of man, haqqullah and haqq al-abd. These are discussions that are found under the heading of the subject matter of hukum. And then briefly, mahkum alayhi. Mahkum alayhi is the person upon whom the hukum is imposed, or the hukum is addressed to some person. And that is involved the discussion of legal capacity, taklif, legal capacity, also ahliya. In order for a person to carry out the demand or the expectation, command, whatever it is, he must be a competent person, intellectually capable, that he is not asleep, he is not intoxicated, that he has reached a certain age, and so on. And there are different categories of ages, that from age 7 up to 21, for example, the age of discernment, the age of puberty, age of majority, age of maturity. There are details that falls under the subject of legal capacity or ahliya. Legal capacity occurs in two varieties, that is ahliyatul wujub and ahliyatul ada. The ahliyatul wujub is the legal capacity that these are in two types. Certain, for example, capacity exists even in a minor person immediately after the birth. And some even would say that ahliyatul wujub originates even before the birth of the child, as of the moment of conception. For example, even at that time, it is he can receive, the child can receive a bequest, for example, or a right that is conferred upon that infant in the embryo. This is ahliyatul wujub. Ahliyatul ada is the capability a person acquires after attainment of certain requirements, that he can take what is in the nature of taklif, in the nature of a demand, whether it is a command or a prohibition, that is full legal. To conclude our discussion of hukum shari, notwithstanding a level of technicality that arises from the detailed study of hukum, in many ways the fiqh, Islamic law that we understand, the five values, the ahkam al-khamsa, this is the major theme of Islamic law. And what we have looked at today are the nature of hukum shari, the requirements, the manner of implementation, the shades of the understanding of the ahkam of sharia. A great deal of it also is parallel to what we might even when we look at modern jurisprudence. Some of these ingredients, for example, the law must originate from competent authority, some of the ingredients that we have looked at, it must be communicated, it must be understandable, and what is the subject matter, and all of these details. Although the Sharia does not occur only in the form of do's and don'ts, Wajib and Haram, but it combines these value categories of recommendable, reprehensible, and Mubah, which may not be found in modern statutory law. And there is the difference between the discussion of Hokum in the Sharia as compared with that of statutory or modern law. Thank you.